All right. Okay. So, hey, welcome back. Uh, all right. Are we gonna focus? Anything point your camera? Is that everything we can do? Focus. Hey, man. All right. Well, whatever. Close as we're gonna get, I guess. Um. Hey, howdy, everyone. Welcome back. Today we're gonna talk about Rome, if you want to. I think that joke's hilarious. I make it every semester. Maybe one person laughs. Fine. All right. Rome. Now, obviously, your book goes into a lot of detail about, the events involving the history of Rome. As always, I am trying to draw together some sense of context for those events. So please read the chapters. Read them. Read them. You need to read them. So yeah. The lectures just won't make as much sense. They won't. They won't. Okay. In our story so far, in the Iron Age, at the end of the second millennium BCE, we had the Bronze Age collapse and the end of the Bronze Age. And now we're in the early Iron Age and the first millennium BCE, which starts with the Greek Dark Age, and they pull themselves out of that and they develop rule of law while the Persians are busy building an empire. And then right around the middle of the first millennium, the Greeks come in conflict with the Persians, and they win, but then they lose. And then Alexander the Great, in kind of in revenge, destroys the Persian Empire and pretty much eliminates all of the major political military power in the entire region that we've been discussing so far, which would be the Fertile Crescent plus the Mediterranean. By dying young and letting his empire collapse into a bunch of successor states that are just fighting amongst themselves. So this leaves Rome sort of a reasonably clear playing field. Their only real opposition is going to be Carthage, which is kind of growing up and getting more powerful on its own in the north of Africa. But Carthage and Rome both are relatively minor players on the world scene at the time that Greece is fighting Persia. Persia is clearly the big man on campus. Greece is small, but or relatively insignificant, let's put it that way. But not as insignificant as Rome and Carthage are at this point. And Egypt is just sort of minding its own business. Egypt's been around forever. At this point, they're just kind of over it. They just want to sit on their bench and feed the pigeons. That's a John Mulaney joke. Anyway. So, basically, it's only because Alexander kind of kicked Egypt in the breadbasket, definitely destroyed the Persian Empire, and then left everything in shambles after, oh yeah, and of course, taking over, uniting mainland Greece, only to watch it fall apart again after he dies. It's only because of all this that Rome is able to kind of become Rome, if you will. But let's turn our attention to what they were doing at the proper times, at the relevant times. So, right around the time that Greece is uniting in their whole rule of law thing to fight the Persians, Pan-Hellenism, League of Delos, talked all about it. Can't have been that long ago. Go watch the video again. Right around the time that that's happening, Rome is a tiny little city-state, basically kind of a polis in the Greek sense. It's a tiny little city-state with a simple kingship model, but right around the time the Persian War is going on, they are getting rid of their last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, as it's usually rendered in English. Ran him out on a rail, or killed him, depending on who you ask. Like, ask that guy who hangs out at the 7-Eleven, what happened to Tarquinius Superbus? And he'll be like, they killed him, duh. You don't really have 7-Eleven around here. You got, quick, QT, whatever the hell that is. Anyway. Alright. Quick trip, right. Sorry, I'm still new to Tulsa, relatively speaking. Some of you are like, he doesn't know what the QT is? Sorry, when I moved here, someone told me QT is a 5-star restaurant with a gas station attached. I don't know about 5-star, but the food is pretty good. Anyway. So, Rome had a lot of QTs. No, no, I'm kidding. Rome was adopting a kind of rule of law situation of their own, wherein the nobles that the king had previously had to cooperate with would form what was called the Senate, which literally, it comes from the Latin senex, which just means old man. So the Senate is literally just a collection of old men, which is hilarious to me. But anyway, they would form the Senate, which would kind of sort of run things. The Roman political structure is extremely complex, and I'm not going to get into details on it. I can link you a video for that. I don't want to I don't want to belabor that point too much. The important point is they were setting up the rule of law right around the same time that the Athenians and the other Greeks were fighting for this quote-unquote distinctively Greek concept of the rule of law. So that's kind of funny to me. But it's possible that the Romans learned it. I learned it from watching you! It is, though. It is possible that the Romans learned it from the Greeks. Because there were Greek settlements in Sicily and southern Italy that the Romans almost certainly would have had some communication and contact with. So it's entirely possible, we don't know for certain, but it's entirely possible that the inhabitants of this little, city-state in the center of Italy, roughly, had contact with these Greek colonies in southern Italy, and they heard about this rule of law thing, and they went back home and they looked at their king and they said, this guy sucks. God, he sucks so bad. And they got rid of their, I'm sure they said just like that too. That's what an ancient Roman accent sounded like. I am a scholar. You can trust me. Make better choices than that. Now, I'm sure that they went back. I mean, it's possible that they went back and decided to get rid of their king on the basis of having seen, that the Greeks kind of get it that way. Funny thing, the reason why the Hellenes, remember that's what they call themselves, they're Hellenes, right? That is the word for a Hellene, is a Greek person, and Hellas is their homeland. But the colonies they had in southern Italy had a name, Great Guy, and it appears, to the best of our knowledge, that the Romans just assumed that, like, all of these people that spoke this language and had this culture were Greek or Greek. So that's why we call them Greek, even though their name for themselves is Hellene. And why we call it Greece, when their name for themselves is Hellas. Their own land is Hellas. Okay, so, funny little story there. Anyway, the Romans created a republic wherein select people within the republic could vote on various offices, people who would run the games, who would be in charge of the food, people who would collect the taxes, record the population, do a census, things like that. This is different from the democracy of Athens in the sense that all of the voting citizens in Athens actually served in running the government. They took turns in committees to do all those things. By contrast, the Romans had a situation where the voting citizenry, which mostly at first consisted of just upper class people, would vote on representatives, people who would occupy the office and do the running of the city for them. So that's a republic as opposed to a direct democracy. Anyway, so Rome is also developing this rule of law thing. And I'm going to link you a video that goes into the history of Rome and its conflicts with Carthage much better than I can. But the upshot is, from about 500, which is roughly when they ran out their last king, to roughly 200, so for 300 years, Rome grew at a very sedate pace. It expanded very slowly across Italy, co-opting the various other cities in Italy, sometimes conquering them, sometimes just kind of bringing them into the fold, if you will. And one of the main ways it was able to peacefully conquer people was an innovation that they had that was sort of, even that went a step beyond even what the Athenians and the other Greeks had done. The Romans had a concept of citizenry that was very broad, whereas in Athens, a small portion of the population were actually voting citizens. In Rome, it was definitely the upper class that controlled everything. Their votes counted for more, but even poor people were citizens. Now, their votes counted for less. They would get lumped together in a big group, and like whoever the most of the poor citizens voted for, like, would get like one vote or something, you know. Like I said, the details of the system are not what I'm going into here, but that's the broad strokes. Nonetheless, they were all considered citizens. And the Roman citizen, under the 12 tables, which were their sort of like their constitution, under their laws, the Roman citizen had rights. rights that may sound familiar to you. Like if they were accused of a crime, they had a right to a trial carried out by certain processes indicated by law. They had a right not to be bound in chains and enslaved by other people, except under very specific circumstances involving debt bondage and so on and so forth. They had a right to grain when in need, a right to basic support from their government. They had a right to vote in all of these elections, so on and so forth. They had a right to protection if they were, threatened by outside forces. They could appeal to the Roman authorities. The Roman authorities were obligated legally to try to protect them. Rome, in other words, granted its citizens, even its very poorest citizens, rights under the rule of law that made being a Roman citizen kind of a sweet gig, really. And there are certain wars that were fought, the social wars as they're called, because they were fought with the Roman socii, their allies in Italy. There are certain wars that entirely turned on the idea of the people fighting Rome wanted to be given the full rights of Roman citizens. In other words, at one point, Rome had allies that were other city-states in Italy. And these city-states went to war with Rome, not to escape their influence, but to be brought more fully into the fold, to be made full-fledged Roman citizens. This may be the only time I can think of in history where somebody went to war with another political entity in order to join them, not to separate from them or to keep them away. They wanted to be a part of them. Let me in! Anyway, right? And so they wanted. So Rome grew slowly, 3 centuries, just to, sort of absorb Sicily and, to absorb Italy. And then they got into the Punic Wars with Carthage. Carthage, as I said, was in North Africa, and Carthage had interests in Sicily, an island just off of Rome, or off of Italy. And so they got into it with them. They fought several wars with Carthage and eventually prevailed. Like I said, I'm not going to go into details there. And doing this got Rome their first big chunk of land that would make them an empire in fact, if not in name. Right? They were still a republic, legally speaking. But now they were governing, they sort of inherited from their victory over Carthage these North African territories, sizable ones, and a lot of territory in what we would now call Spain, and like southern France. So now Rome had foreign holdings, like not just stuff, Italy is not that big. If you're in Rome, you can take a horse and sort of ride, the length and breadth of Italy in a fairly short amount of time, But now Rome had holdings. It had an empire. It had property and land and legal authority over a vast swath of the Western Mediterranean, pretty much all of the Western Mediterranean at this point. And this is where things started to change for Rome. Rome's republic, it was kind of a cobbled together mess. It was. But it was, they were first out of the gate on the whole republic thing. You don't expect anybody to get things right on the first try. All right, I'll cut them some slack on that. Their system wasn't perfect, but it was working. We haven't been around 300 years. The United States, we're not 300 years old. We got 50 more years left on that. Plus, a little bit of change. right? 50, 60 years left before we're 100 years old, 300 years old. They made it 300 years under this republic and kept things relatively stable. But with the addition of all this new territory, things began to change and change rapidly. And there were two factors involved, both related. Now, the first factor was that Rome was becoming an empire, in fact, if not in name. And after its successes with Carthage and the massive influx of wealth, I mean, wealth was largely tied to land. Rome had a trade economy that was more advanced than what we would see in the European Dark Ages, but still a lot of wealth is generated by farming, by land, in other words. Rome had just acquired, Rome had more than tripled its territory by defeating Carthage. So it became vastly more wealthy, kind of in a very short period of time. And they began to see the possibilities of that. And early Rome, a YouTuber named Blue, over on Overly Sarcastic, said that Rome followed a policy of defensive aggression, where they didn't attack anybody unless they were pretty sure they were about to be attacked. I'm not 100% sure how true that is, but I do know that Rome was cautious and slow in its expansion across Italy. But after Carthage, Rome became aggressive and expansionistic and wanted to rapidly acquire new territory everywhere it could. It began pushing north across the Alps into what we would now call France and Germany. It pushed east and conquered the Grecian, mainland Greece, right? And eventually pushed further east across Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and into the Western Fertile Crescent, Syria, Israel, places like that. It didn't conquer Egypt, but it kind of put Egypt on notice, right? It didn't actually go in and conquer it, but it did kind of say, you're going to do what I tell you, right? And the Egyptians were like, I guess, since you're everywhere. Not right at first, getting conquered anyway. But after Carthage and the Punic Wars, Rome began to expand rapidly. So they became massively more wealthy in a very short period of time, thanks to the Punic Wars. And then they began rapidly acquiring more land, becoming even wealthier. Now, as to why Rome's republic had remained stable for 300 years, we can only guess, but it can be observed that when Rome was small and in relative terms poor, even if you were a noble, there was not a massive difference between your life and the life of the poor. You both enjoyed rights as a Roman citizen, equal rights as a Roman citizen, pretty much. And yeah, you had more money if you were one of the wealthy, but there wasn't that much money in total to begin with, so, kind of big whoop, right? But as Rome gets massively more wealthy, the fact that the system is, by design, built to favor the wealthy becomes more and more of a sticking point. Now, throughout Rome, there have been pushes by the plebeians, that is to say the common people, by the plebeians to get more rights and more representation. And some of that had been accomplished. The Roman republican system was constantly in flux, refining what the offices did, fiddling with what kind of offices existed, exactly how votes were counted, so on and so forth. They were constantly developing their system. As Rome's wealth began to expand exponentially, the gap between the very wealthy and the very poor became exponentially larger. and the very poor were pretty pissed off about it. They agitated for reform more eagerly, more vehemently. Now, this is in the 2nd century BCE. So after Alexander has kind of smashed everything, Rome is only able to expand because there aren't any big players standing in the way. So the timing on that was good, right? They're like, hey, we got all this land from the Punic Wars. Is there any way we can get more? And someone says, well, the Persian, oh shit, Persian Empire's gone. What came in after it? Nothing. Let's go get that land, right? That's kind of how that went. Sure, that's exactly how it went. The Romans, the common people in Rome, felt it more and more pressing to get political reform, to get more equal representation in the system, to have their votes counted. There were more of them than there were of the nobles, after all. And they did the hard work of going to war and fighting for all of these new conquests that were enriching the nobility primarily and not anyone else. They said, hey, why do our votes only count for a fraction of what their votes count for? Right? And in the 2nd century BCE, this would start to become a real crisis. We would see the plebeians and the slave class, the servile class, both causing a lot of trouble as they agitated for reform and fair treatment. Change the fundamental nature of the republic, that is, from one that intentionally and by design favored the wealthy to one that enfranchised the whole of the Roman population equally. Now again, this story should sound a little familiar. In the early days of America, you couldn't vote unless you were a white male landowner. And what happened? Over the past 200 years, non-white, non-male, non-landowners have been pretty pissy about that, and with justification. And the right to vote has been radically expanded. In Rome, these political upheavals were severe. They led to civil wars. Again, wonder where we heard that. They led to assassinations of prominent political figures that represented the common people. Wonder where we've heard that before, right? They led to a military takeover of Rome by a general who was in favor of just stopping the madness and peace and quiet. Okay, we haven't done that. We haven't done that one yet. But you can kind of see a there but for the grace of God go I sort of situation, right? Things built up to a head in Rome. And, roughly about the, in the vicinity of the end of the 2nd century BCE, we get Sulla, a Roman general who says, this is some bullshit, I'm tired of all the riots, I'm tired of all the uprisings. He wasn't necessarily for the common people, and he wasn't necessarily for the aristocrats. Sulla was for peace and quiet, I think. So he marched into Rome, murdered a ton of people, put out a new list every day during his reign of the people who were to be rounded up and executed. That's some brutal shit, man. Sulla's reign was eventually overthrown, and the Republic was restored, but the fundamental problems of the Republic were not fixed, right? Representation among the common people had been increased, but nowhere near enough as far as the relevant people were concerned. The senators, the nobility, were standing fast on maintaining all the power and wealth in their hands. The common people were not having any of this bullshit. And then, in about the middle of the 1st century BCE, you get a kind of perfect storm, a confluence of events. There was a guy, a consul of Rome, basically kind of like a president, a consul of Rome who had gone on to what they call a governorship, where after he was consul, he was appointed to a period of years to rule over one of the outlying provinces. His name was Julius Caesar. He was a very popular figure. He was from a noble family that was not particularly wealthy. He was charismatic. He was well liked by his soldiers and by the common people. He was not super well liked by the nobility. Was it because he actually wanted reforms to help the common people? Or was it because he was a political opportunist who could see which way the winds were blowing and decided to get on the side he thought was going to win? I don't know. No one can really answer that. But what we do know is that he had a bunch of outstanding loans that he couldn't pay and had no intention of paying. He kind of skipped out on them. And he was relying on the fact that as governor, they couldn't drag him into court. He was above, he couldn't be, they couldn't bring suit against him while he's governor, so they wouldn't be able to get their money back. He also waged what the Senate called an illegal war, in the sense that he was fighting the German barbarians, the tribesmen in Gaul, his governorship, and he went to war on one of the tribes that was ostensibly allied with Rome. Again, his exact reasons are a subject of debate, but maybe because he legitimately thought they were a problem, and maybe just because they had a lot of treasure and stuff that he wanted, and he took it. Either way, the point being is that he knew his governorship was running out. And his illegal war was annoying people in the Senate because he was becoming very wealthy through this war, through all the treasure and stuff that he seized from the tribes. And they were worried about him. So they passed a resolution and he was named an enemy of Rome. And they expected him, I guess, to just give up and say, well, you got me, guys. Rescind your enemy of Rome thing, and I'll come quietly. That's not what he did. Instead, like Sulla, he marched his army into Rome and took over. Unlike Sulla, he did not purge his enemies. There were a few people killed, but really he was very, very relaxed and showed a lot of mercy towards his enemies. He did, however, kind of start running things like an autocrat, right? He had the power of dictator, which in Roman government was sort of like emergency powers. Dicto in Rome, D-I-C-T-O, means I speak or I say. And the idea, so the dictator is literally the one who speaks in Latin. And they have this emergency powers clause in their system of government where the Senate could vote dictatorial powers to someone for a short period in order to solve a crisis. And while the powers lasted, the dictator did not have to go through any of the usual channels. He could do anything he wanted. His word was law. In other words, he ruled like an autocrat, without the rule of law in effect. But the dictator's powers were limited, or were of limited duration. The powers were unlimited, but they only lasted a short period of time. And he was ruling as dictator to solve the crisis that he kind of created. But then the Senate started to worry that they were never going to get the Republic back when he had them, kind of at spear point, vote him dictator for life, to give him these emergency powers for as long as he lived. And the Senate was like, shit, this is not going to work. And the Senate was doubly motivated because a lot of his reforms were helping out the common people. Right? He was doing a lot of stuff to help the people, the average day-to-day people. So, what was the deal with Caesar? Did he actually want to become a king? Was he just literally, I mean, some of the things don't make sense. Some people say Caesar wanted to be a tyrant. He wanted to be an autocrat. He was an egomaniac who wanted absolute power. And he had it. But other people point out that, hey, Caesar's reforms, some of them make no sense whatsoever if he wasn't planning on there being a republic after he died. Right? Some of the reforms only make sense in the context of someone who is trying to rebuild the republic in a more fair and equitable fashion so that when he dies, it will be different and these kinds of things won't happen. Why did he need dictator powers for life? I don't know, maybe he was afraid that if he was no longer a dictator, he would be assassinated. Or that his reforms should be undone. Maybe he wanted to make sure that they were in place for long enough that it would be difficult to dig them out. I don't know. Maybe he was an egomaniac who just wanted to be an autocrat. I don't know, man. I don't know. What we do know is this. Caesar was assassinated, rather famously, stabbed to death in the Temple of Jupiter by a bunch of senators who did not like his bullshit, in so many words. And after that, there was more chaos, predictably speaking. There was more chaos, and eventually, I'm glossing over a lot of military history that I absolutely don't give a shit about for purposes of these videos. Eventually, Caesar's nephew, who he adopted as a son, that was the thing that Romans did sometimes. Caesar had no sons of his own to inherit, so he adopted his nephew as a son to inherit his estate and everything. Caesar's nephew, Octavian, a very smart young boy, but by no means a military mind, Octavian manages to come out on top, and Octavian does not rebuild the Republic. Octavian basically absorbs all the powers of the various offices into himself. Now, some of you might be saying, how did he do that? Did he cut off their heads and like lightning flowed into him? No. Look, it was a period of chaos. And Octavian beat everybody else. He beat all comers, including Mark Antony, a guy who was supposedly the greatest military genius next to Caesar. Octavian beat him. So when Octavian shows up in a Rome that has been ravaged by civil war and uprising for like the last century and change, and says, you're going to give me all the powers of all the other offices. I'm going to basically be an autocrat. The people, who had those choices to either go along with him or not, were either too scared or too tired to fight him on it. They're just like, you know what, fine. Is it going to be peaceful? He's like, yeah, it'll be peaceful. And they're like, fine, whatever, man. Do whatever you want. And he did. Augustus, he changed his name to Augustus, Revered One. Right, we're there. Respected One, however you want to translate that. Changed his name to Augustus and became the first emperor of Rome. Rome was still a republic on paper, but in practice, it was an autocracy. And some of you are saying, but wait, Professor Church, you told me that Greece and Italy and those places did not have the economic base to sustain an autocracy, unlike the empires further east in the Fertile Crescent. And you're right, they didn't at first. Remember what I said about an empire in fact, if not in name? by the time Augustus becomes emperor, Rome owns everything. Rome owns basically all of France, or most of France, and most of Germany, and big swaths of Spain, and North Africa, and the Western Fertile Crescent, and all of Anatolia. Rome's got everything wired tight, and mainland Greece. Rome had more than enough wealth to sustain the autocratic model of government. And guess what? Once it got wealthy enough to sustain the autocratic model of government, an autocrat emerged. How funny. But the autocrat could have only emerged in a situation where the traditional institutions of Rome had decayed to the point to allow him to. What he was doing was technically illegal as hell. And if the people who were in charge of enforcing the laws had held that line firmly and said, no, that's illegal, they could have done him like they did Caesar, right? Caesar was kind of doing a bunch of stuff that was illegal as hell. Dictator for life? That's not how it worked. He forced them to vote him dictator for life, but then they turned around and stabbed him to death, right? Augustus could have wound up going the same way. But the people who were in charge of maintaining the integrity of the traditions and institutions of Rome just kind of said, screw it, man, let him do what he wants, right? It's too hard. It's too difficult. I'm scared that if I stick my neck out, no one else will do it with me, and I'll get my head chopped off, right? I'm scared that if I come at the king and I miss, I'm going to die, right? Or maybe it wasn't fear, maybe it was just apathy, where they're like, you know what, as long as I have food in my belly and my job doesn't go away, I'm fine, I don't give a shit, right? The Romans founded a republic. And for 500 years, well, for 300 years, the republic was pretty stable. For the last 200 years, there was a lot of chaos and fighting over the future of that republic. But the future of that republic was no future. In the end, the Republican traditions were essentially abandoned with a shrug and a sigh, as the people responsible for guarding those traditions gave away the store to Augustus. Augustus says, by the way, I have all these powers. They're technically illegal, but I still have them. And they're like, you know what? Fine. And that was that. Augustus, unlike his father, did live a long life and was able to enshrine new traditions. By the time he died, the idea of taking Rome back to its previous constitution was just not even really on the table. The tradition of the emperor had become so entrenched in their cultural consciousness that it was just a new fact of life. So after him, there was another emperor, and another, and another, for another 500 years and change, or thereabouts. We'll talk about that later. Rome started out as a republic, following on the Greek tradition of rule of law. They were able to maintain this for a while, but as the gap in wealth between the rich and the poor grew more severe, the poor, quite obviously, began to agitate for more representation and control over their government, a share in this wealth. Hey! My cat, ladies and gentlemen. They began agitating for a share in this wealth. The people who had the wealth did not want to give any of it up. They fought them. They killed their leaders. They repressed their riots. And in the end, it wasn't even one of the popular leaders who actually cared about reforming things for the poor, probably. It was an opportunist who saw a chance to rid himself of an enormous amount of debt and possibly a death sentence, who came in and basically usurped the government, made war on his own people, the people of Rome, in order to secure his position. They kill him in an effort to stop this assault on their traditions and institutions. But the people who did it were unable to hold power because they were the same idiots, upper class idiots, that the common people were against in the first place. They didn't restore the Republic to the way it had been. They just restored it to the same chaos that it was before Caesar took over. And in that chaos, another opportunist, or maybe a visionary, depending on how you think about it, rose to power by basically killing everyone who got in his way and bribing the rest who he didn't kill. And by the time he rose to the top and demanded all sorts of unconstitutional powers from the Senate, everyone was so tired of chaos or so scared of him that they just said, it's fine, you can do whatever you want. And they refused to provide a check on his power. And that's all it takes. That's all it took. Augustus did not become emperor by battling a bunch of mini-bosses and then beating the last guy. It's not like, he eats their brains and consumes their power or something. It's not like that. There's no power up. He literally just walked into the room and said, give me the power. And the only thing that's required for him to have the power is for a bunch of people to agree not to stop him from having it. He says, I'm going to do all this illegal shit. You're going to stop me? And all they had to do was go, no, not really. And so he could do all that illegal shit. That's all it takes to end a republic. For someone to say, I'm not going to respect our traditions. Does anyone have a problem with that? And the people who are in charge of protecting those traditions say, no, we don't have a problem with that. Republic over. Done. Boom. You're finished. That's all it takes. So that's Rome, the Roman Republic. That's how it began and how it ended. Now there's a lot of history, 500 years of history that I didn't cover in there. I'm not interested in the trees, I'm interested in the forest. I want to show you the unifying narrative that emerges out of this. What these events signify, what they mean. And that's a good reading, if you ask me. That's a good reading of these events. Maybe the reading of these events, in my opinion. I'm going to link to some videos that have the details, if you want to get into the names and the dates and the battles, it's fine. By all means. A lot of those are in your book. But don't mistake knowing the things that happened for knowing what happened. Okay. All right. My back was hurting yesterday, so I was really worried about today's workout. I managed about 50 minutes, so not bad. Have a good day. See you in the next video.